In the hidden chambers beneath ancient cathedrals, in the secret vaults that exist in the spaces between official history and forbidden memory, there is a genealogy that has been carefully preserved, meticulously guarded, deliberately hidden from the knowledge of the world. This is not the genealogy of kings and emperors, though it has influenced the course of kingdoms and empires. This is the genealogy of consciousness itself, the bloodline of those who carried within them the divine spark, the lineage of those who understood the true nature of power and divinity. This is the royal bloodline of the dragon, and at its heart lies a secret so profound, so transformative, that the entire institutional church was built on the suppression of this single truth. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute, not a sinner, not a woman of ill repute. She was the high priestess of an ancient order, the keeper of sacred mysteries, the beloved companion of Christ, and the mother of a child who would carry forward the consciousness of the divine into future generations. This is the story of what they hid about Mary Magdalene, and why the revelation of this truth would reshape the entire foundation of Western civilization. The story begins in the time of Christ, in the years following his crucifixion, when his closest followers were struggling to understand what had happened, when they were trying to decide what Christianity would become, what teachings would be preserved, and what teachings would be suppressed. In those days, there was a woman who stood at the center of this struggle, a woman who understood Christ's teachings more deeply than any of the male disciples, a woman who had been chosen by Christ himself to be the keeper of his most sacred knowledge and the guardian of his most precious legacy. This woman was Mary Magdalene, though this was not her only name, not her only identity, not her only role. Mary Magdalene came from a family that had preserved the ancient mysteries since the time of Egypt, since the time of the goddess religions that had been driven underground by the patriarchal religions. She was trained in the deepest initiations, in the knowledge of how consciousness could be transformed and elevated, in the wisdom of the divine feminine that had been suppressed by those who sought to maintain power through the domination of women, and the suppression of the sacred feminine principle. When Mary Magdalene encountered Christ, something extraordinary happened. She recognized in him a consciousness that had achieved the full awakening that the ancient teachings pointed toward. She recognized that he was a living demonstration of what was possible when a human being fully aligned themselves with the divine consciousness. And she understood that she had been prepared her entire life for this meeting, that her role was to be his closest companion, his partner in the great work of awakening humanity, his equal in the sacred mysteries. But the relationship between Christ and Mary Magdalene was far more than what the official Gospels suggest. It was a sacred union, a union of the divine masculine and divine feminine principles, a union that created a field of consciousness so powerful that it could transform those who came into contact with it. And this union bore fruit. Mary Magdalene conceived and bore a child, a daughter who carried within her the consciousness of both Christ and Mary Magdalene, a being who was born to continue the work of awakening that Christ had begun. The royal bloodline of the dragon refers to this lineage, this descent from Christ and Mary Magdalene, this unbroken chain of consciousness that had been preserved through the ages. The term dragon refers to the ancient symbol of wisdom, of the Kundalini energy, of the divine feminine power that had been represented as a dragon in various cultures and various times. The royal bloodline was not about genetic superiority or earthly power. It was about the transmission of consciousness, about the preservation of knowledge, about the continuation of the sacred work that Christ and Mary Magdalene had begun. But the institutional church, sensing the threat that this knowledge represented, worked systematically to suppress it. The church declared that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, a sinner, a woman of ill repute. The Church erased her from the official Gospels, removed her from the positions of authority that Christ had given her, denied her role as the keeper of sacred knowledge, and most importantly, the Church worked to erase all knowledge of the child that she had borne, the descendant who carried the consciousness of Christ into future generations. The story of the recovery of the truth about Mary Magdalene and the royal bloodline of the dragon in the modern world begins with a woman named Mary, a woman who carries within her the consciousness of Mary Magdalene, who is living through the experience of awakening in her own life. Mary is a researcher, a scholar, a woman who has dedicated her entire life to the study of the suppressed Gospels, to the decoding of hidden messages, to the understanding of the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of official Christian history. Mary had always felt drawn to the figure of Mary Magdalene, drawn to the mystery of who she truly was, drawn to the knowledge that the official church had deliberately distorted her story. She had spent decades researching, studying the apocryphal Gospels, comparing different versions of the Gospel accounts, looking for evidence of what had been hidden, for clues about the true nature of Mary Magdalene's relationship with Christ. It was during a deep meditation in a sacred cave in the south of France, a place that was said to have been where Mary Magdalene had retreated after the crucifixion, that Mary received a vision that would change the course of her life. In this vision, she found herself in the presence of Mary Magdalene herself, a being of immense wisdom and power who had been working through the ages to preserve the truth, to guide the awakening of consciousness, to ensure that the knowledge would not be completely lost. "You have been called," Mary Magdalene said to her, her voice resonating with the authority of ages and the tenderness of infinite love. "You have been chosen because you carry within you the blood of the dragon, because you have the capacity to understand what others cannot perceive, because you are willing to pay the price that understanding demands. The time has come for the truth to be revealed. The time has come for the world to understand who I truly was, what Christ and I accomplished together, what the royal bloodline represents. And you have been prepared your entire life for this moment." Mary emerged from this vision transformed. She understood that she'd been given access to knowledge that had been hidden for nearly 2,000 years. Knowledge that could reshape the entire understanding of Christianity, of Western civilization, of the nature of consciousness itself. She understood that her role was to help restore the truth, to help humanity awaken to the reality that lay beneath the lies that had been constructed. She began to research with new urgency, looking for evidence of the royal bloodline in the historical records, in the genealogies that had been preserved, in the fragmentary accounts that had survived despite centuries of suppression. She discovered that the descendants of Mary Magdalene and Christ had fled to the south of France after the crucifixion, had established hidden communities, had worked to preserve the knowledge and to transmit it to future generations. She discovered that these descendants had married into royal families, had influenced the course of European history, had worked to ensure that the knowledge would be preserved even as the institutional church worked to suppress it. She discovered that the legends of the Holy Grail were not about a physical cup, but about the bloodline itself, about the sacred lineage that carried the consciousness of Christ forward through the ages. She discovered that the symbols of the dragon, the rose, the lily, the fleur-de-lis that appeared throughout European heraldry and throughout the symbols of various royal families were all references to the royal bloodline of the dragon, to the descendants of Mary Magdalene and Christ, to the keepers of the sacred knowledge that the Church had tried so desperately to suppress. She discovered that there were individuals throughout history who had been initiated into the mysteries of the royal bloodline, who had understood the truth about Mary Magdalene, who had worked to guide the evolution of consciousness toward the moment of awakening. She discovered that these individuals had established secret societies, had created hidden teachings, had encoded the knowledge into art and architecture and literature, Mary began to work with other researchers and spiritual teachers who had also recognized the truth about Mary Magdalene and the royal bloodline, who understood that the suppression of this knowledge had had profound consequences for human consciousness and human civilization, who were committed to the revelation of the truth to humanity. Together they began to decode the symbols, to understand the patterns, to recognize how the truth had been hidden in plain sight within the very structures that had been created to suppress it. They discovered that the suppression of Mary Magdalene's true role had created a fundamental imbalance in human consciousness, an imbalance that had led to the domination of women, the suppression of the divine feminine, the creation of systems of power that were based on control rather than on love. They discovered that the restoration of the truth about Mary Magdalene was essential for the healing of this imbalance, for the awakening of consciousness, for the transformation of human civilization. They discovered that the royal bloodline was not just about the physical descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene, but about all those who carried within them the consciousness of the divine feminine united with the divine masculine, who understood the sacred union of these principles, who were committed to the awakening of this consciousness in all beings. If you want a practical step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Mary spent years developing a comprehensive teaching that would help others understand the truth about Mary Magdalene, that would guide them toward the recognition of the divine feminine within themselves, that would help them understand that they too were part of the royal bloodline of the dragon, that they too carried within them the consciousness of the sacred union between the masculine and feminine principles. She wrote books that were published under various names. She created videos and online courses. She established networks of practitioners who were working together to awaken to the consciousness of Mary Magdalene and to help others do the same. She worked with other women who had also been awakened to their role as carriers of the divine feminine, who understood that they too were part of the royal bloodline, who were committed to the restoration of the sacred feminine to the center of human consciousness. But as Mary's work became more widely known, she began to encounter resistance. There were those within the institutional church who saw her work as a threat, who feared that the revelation of the truth about Mary Magdalene would undermine their authority and their control. There were academic institutions that tried to suppress her research, to prevent her books from being published, to discredit her work. And there were more subtle forms of resistance as well. Mary began to experience strange phenomena, synchronicities that seemed designed to test her commitment, challenges that appeared to be obstacles, but which were actually initiations, opportunities to deepen her understanding and her faith in the truth that she had been given. But Mary understood that this resistance was itself a sign of the truth of what she had discovered. The fact that there was such desperate opposition to the revelation of the truth about Mary Magdalene and the royal bloodline only confirmed that something of immense power and significance was indeed occurring, that the suppressed knowledge was indeed beginning to emerge into human consciousness. She also came to understand something profound about the nature of the royal bloodline. She understood that it was not about genetic purity or earthly power, but about consciousness, about the transmission of awareness, about the continuation of the sacred work that Christ and Mary Magdalene had begun. She understood that anyone who awakened to the consciousness of the divine feminine, united with the divine masculine, became part of the royal bloodline, became a carrier of the sacred knowledge, became a guardian of the mysteries that had been preserved. She understood that the revelation of the truth about Mary Magdalene was not just about historical accuracy or the correction of past injustices. It was about the liberation of human consciousness from the limitations that had been imposed upon it, about the restoration of balance between the masculine and feminine principles, about the creation of a world in which the sacred feminine was honored and celebrated as the equal of the sacred masculine. In her final years, Mary worked to synthesize all of the knowledge she had gathered to create a comprehensive teaching that would serve as a guide for the awakening of the royal bloodline in human consciousness. She wrote a final book that was intended to be her magnum opus, a complete guide to understanding the truth about Mary Magdalene, recognizing one's connection to the royal bloodline of the dragon, and awakening to the consciousness of the sacred union between the masculine and feminine principles. When Mary died, her work lived on. The knowledge she had preserved and transmitted continued to spread, reaching people in every corner of the world. More and more people began to understand that the truth about Mary Magdalene had been hidden, that the royal bloodline was real, that they too could awaken to the consciousness of the divine feminine united with the divine masculine. And in our own time, we are witnessing the revelation of the truth about Mary Magdalene and the royal bloodline of the dragon in unprecedented ways. We are seeing women rising to claim their power and their voice. We are seeing the recognition of Mary Magdalene's true role in history. We are seeing the restoration of the sacred feminine to the center of human consciousness. We are seeing the collapse of institutions built on the suppression of this knowledge and the emergence of new forms of spirituality that honor both the masculine and feminine principles. The truth about Mary Magdalene is no longer hidden. The royal bloodline of the dragon is no longer suppressed. The sacred knowledge that had been preserved through the ages is being revealed, and those who are ready to receive this knowledge, who are willing to open their hearts and minds to the wisdom of Mary Magdalene, who are committed to the awakening of the divine feminine within themselves and within all beings, are being called to join in the great work of transformation that is reshaping human consciousness and human civilization. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. She was a high priestess, a keeper of sacred mysteries, the beloved companion of Christ, the mother of a lineage that carried forward the consciousness of the divine. The royal bloodline of the dragon is the lineage of those who understand the sacred union of the masculine and feminine principles, who are committed to the awakening of this consciousness in all beings, who work to create a world in which the divine feminine is honored and celebrated. And you are invited to recognize yourself as part of this lineage, to awaken to the consciousness of the royal bloodline within yourself, to claim your role in the great work of transformation. The question that is being posed to each of us is this: will you recognize the truth about Mary Magdalene? Will you awaken to your connection to the royal bloodline of the dragon? Will you help to guide others toward the recognition of the sacred feminine within themselves? Will you participate in the restoration of balance between the masculine and feminine that will transform the world? The truth is being revealed. The royal bloodline is awakening. The sacred feminine is rising. And in this rising lies the key to the liberation of consciousness and the transformation of all creation. And if you liked this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.